I just want to welcome everyone to our event today. This is put on by the Asian Pacific Islander Association, celebrating Heritage Month for this year. We're so proud of all the events that we've been able to put on. The panel that Mary also put together earlier today was just phenomenal. And we're hoping to just continue some of those amazing conversations right now. I want to start off, Mary, did you want to do the land acknowledgement in the same way as the previous one? Okay.
Yes.
So we will build land acknowledgements into introductions of our speakers, and just give them a space to share some of their background and their histories. So in doing that, the title of this particular one is The Bamboo Ceiling, the Model Minority Myth and Gender Panel. And I am going to briefly put the names and contact info for our speakers up, but then I'm actually just going to hand it off to Mary because she's amazing and she put all the work into this. So off to you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And yes, we do have a good amount of folks in the room, so we're going to move forward and get started. I do want to go back to the idea of land acknowledgement a little bit, though, because we do want to, recognize the land that we're on. And I'm in occupied Yuhaviatam Serrano land, which is commonly known as the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians. One of our tech folks is going to put in the chat a link where you can look up the indigenous native First People land that you are on. This link is specific to California. But we also want to encourage folks to share with us if you have links or resources to the native indigenous land that you're on, or the land of your ancestors, the land of your family, any of the land that we want to acknowledge today. And we're going to, as we go through introductions, ask our panelists to also share with us, a little land acknowledgement about the lands where they're from, and just kind of really center that as we talk about social justice and API community today. As we set these two panels today, we specifically had in mind the conversation around social justice, and we cannot ever talk about justice, period, without talking about what happened to First Peoples, Native peoples, indigenous peoples around Turtle Island and the globe. So we center that and start that conversation by doing a land acknowledgement. But of course, that's not enough. A land acknowledgement is not enough. We have to continue that rigorous conversation where we, criticize. Earlier, one of our panelists, Nicole, had a shirt on that said, "Critique me," critique this. And, that's the spirit that we come to this conversation in. Of critiquing, what happened on this land before we arrived, whose stories are being told and centered, whose stories are not being told and centered, and so that's why we do this. So I want to make sure that that's clear and folks understand. And so please share in the chat the land that you're on or the land that your people are from. My name is Mary Valdemar. I'm a 6th generation Chicana Indígena. I work in the library. I'm an alumni and student from Valley College who became a staff and never left, and have been on campus now more than 20 years. And so I'm super honored to be able to present this amazing panel as we talk about the bamboo ceiling and unpack some of the earlier conversations we had in the month about the model minority myth, and dive a little deeper into how that specifically impacts queer, femme, LGBTQ, IA plus community. And so let me start with getting right into our introductions. First, I want to introduce Nico, or Nicole Dungo, who is a Filipino grassroots organizer with her BA in Public Health Policy and 2 minors in Asian American Studies and Gender and Sexuality Studies from the University of California, Irvine. She has utilized her studies to be an activist and youth organizer in working class concerns of Filipino immigrants and Filipino Americans in Long Beach and in the Inland Empire. She's familiar with organizing, as she started with the collegiate student organizing at UCI and at Kababayan and Southern California Filipino American Student Alliance in 2018. While she's currently her mother's caregiver, she continues to organize with NEFCON and Gabriela South Bay, a Filipino American Public Health Conference, Kapokatapan, with Nicole, and her own Live Collective, which was founded in Riverside, by the way, South Riverside. If she isn't watching animated shows or anime, you can catch her discussing intergenerational mental health and its connection to systemic oppression. And of course, we can't have this conversation without talking about mental health. So I'm going to invite Nico to spend a few moments, giving us a little bit more about you and how you came to this work. Include your ancestors and your family and your land acknowledgement. And we'll let you launch us off with just maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll go to our next panelist.
Thank you so much, Mary, Chloe, Bethany, and all of SBVC's Asian Pacific Islanders Center. I'm really honored and grateful to be invited here as one of your panel speakers, especially for the month of May, and to really give you a different perspective of how I view my own identity, my own journey as a Filipina whose parents, one of the both from the Philippines, immigrated from the Philippines. My father's side was from Pampanga. My mother's side is from Nevesia, and they're both on the North Philippines, the topmost island, which is called Luzon. And we currently are here in Kalia land, or the colonial name is Menifee. So that's where I'm residing currently at the moment. And so I guess just to start my journey, my whole meaningful relationship with activism didn't really start until I got into college. Living in the IE, born and raised here. Actually, no, I was raised here since I was 1. I was born in Daly City, which was like probably one of the other epicenters of the Philippines. One of the cities outside of the Philippines that has a lot of Filipinos. And so I've been raised here in the IE, and I've been raised within its own bubble, its own its very specific bubble, conservative bubble, until I broke out when I moved to Irvine and got a taste of what it means to be a woman of color, an Asian American woman, a Filipina woman, a working class woman. And these are just the many parts of me that I'll specifically touch upon, but these are ways that informed and guided me in how I was essentially able to build like community connections, my own community organizing journey. And to this day, I'm still connected to like current issues happening in the Philippines and over here in the United States. I was in the panel earlier, and so I really wanted to not only uplift how organizing impacts my identity, especially when I started with visibility and representation politics, and where that carried me onto from here. So I started everything at UCI, from a youth student organizer 2018 to where I actually saw a lot of impacts of microaggressions, a lot of things swept under the rug by the UCI administrations when it comes to racial attacks on the student population. I was in close proximity of a member who was of a black female student who was racially attacked by 2 white girls. And I asked my club membership, I asked the administration, I was looking towards faculty, be like, what is there to be done? And no responses whatsoever. And so I kept moving and moving forward to where I'm currently with where I went into like film organizing, asking around, looking towards faculty, is like, why isn't there any more Asian American faculty representation, more support for Asian American immigrant working class students, more support for your marginalized, the more vulnerable students on this campus. I kept going, and especially until after I graduated, I kept going into more working class progressive women, working classes women's issue. This is where I joined Gabriella, one of the progressive grassroots Filipino orgs that I'm a part of, where we take a stance against imperialism, capitalism, and other forms of systemic oppression. And so currently where I am is that I am, a caregiver. I worked alongside Mary and alongside the panelists in nonprofit areas as well as grassroots organizing areas. Again, I'm really, really thankful and honored to be here to share my experience about it all.
Thank you so much, Nico. With that, we're going to introduce Kevin. And Kevin is a non-binary community member of Riverside. They were raised in Riverside and carried on their education at the University of California, Riverside, UCR, obtaining their BA in psychology in 2019. Kevin has experience working in the nonprofit sector as an educator, a crisis counselor to survivors of sexual assault. Kevin's interests involve addressing gender-based violence, specifically the health inequities that trans and gender nonconforming folks encounter, as well as reducing stigma the community faces daily. Kevin now serves the community as a cultural community liaison. In this work, Kevin aims to bridge the LGBTQ plus community to gender-affirming services and to educate others on how we can best foster authentic allyship to the community through behavioral health systems. With that, Kevin, you want to give us 2 or 3 minutes about, how you first got into this work, and of course, honoring your ancestors and your family, and anything you'd just like us to share before we dive into our questions.
Yes, thank you, Mary, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm super excited to be a part of this panel. I am honored to be invited to speak and to represent the LGBTQ community. So I am a non-binary queer individual of Riverside. I am also first-generation Laotian American. So my parents, my family, they sought refuge in the United States in the 70s. And so from there, they first landed in Texas and moved kind of all throughout the States and then ended up here in California. And so both my parents are Laotian, and my mother is currently a registered nurse up in leadership at San Antonio Community Hospital. My father works with a car company with Karma, I believe. I don't know much about cars. So, but anyway, so I started really in community work as just like Nicole in college. So looking for individuals who are like-minded as myself, and just also looking for a sense of community, I looked for queer spaces. And I started out at Marina Valley College, and with the LGBT club there was only me, one other member, the president, and our advisor. So it was a very, very small club. And I wanted to change that. So I got really close with those who were already involved, and we changed the name of the club to make it more inclusive. That was called Pride Alliance. And so by the next semester, when we were recruiting folks and we were tabling, we got a huge turnout. And then we got about 50 plus folks coming to our meetings every week. Not just students, but also parents who wanted to learn more about the community and also just learn how to support their children who are queer. So I've also found a lot throughout my life that, folks perceive me to be queer, right? And I had many, many, many conversations with moms, especially talking about their queer child, how to support them. And so naturally, also trying to understand myself and just fascinated with the human mind, right? I studied psychology. And so when I was at UCR, I was a part of a few research labs. So I was part of the health psychology lab called Life Events with Dr. Sweeney, where we studied the disparities of folks of different cultural, ethnic backgrounds and their inequities with healthcare. And I was also part of the adaption, I can't remember the first name, Adaption Adversity Lab, where we looked at adverse experiences of children, specifically in foster youth. So I have a little bit both of the community side and that research experience as well. I moved into the nonprofit sector after graduating, and I worked at the Riverside Area Rape Crisis Center, where I was an educator and crisis counselor. So I was both working in prevention and intervention work. So I really got to see both sides of that field. And I will say there was not a lot of Asian AAPI folks coming to seek our services. And I always questioned why, right? Because as much as I'd like to believe that intimate partner violence was not happening to our community, we know it is. So there was a big issue of not being able to bridge that community to our services, right? Not only that, but we also didn't have a lot of queer services. So I wear many different hats trying to establish programming, right? I ventured on and now I'm currently with RUHS, Riverside University Health System Behavioral Health. I'm part of the Cultural Competency Program. So I'm one of 9 liaisons. I represent the LGBTQ community. And in this role, my primary role is to outreach and build relationships with community-based organizations and see how community-based organizations and the county can rather compete with services and compete to be providing for our communities, how we can work together, right? And also making sure that our behavioral health staff is culturally competent when they do have an LGBTQ client. So I serve as a consultant should folks ever have questions about pronouns, gender identity, things such as that. I like to call myself almost like an LGBTQ encyclopedia that people can kind of just kind of navigate and understand with themselves how they can better service the community. So that is me. Oh, my land acknowledgement. So I currently am residing in Riverside. I have a land acknowledgement that we have for Riverside County. So we occupy the Cahuilla, Cupeño, Luceño, Serrano, and Chemehuevi land. And yeah, that is me. And I'm excited to be a part of this panel. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was amazing. With that, we're going to go to our last but not least panelist, Regina. If you were in our panel earlier today, Regina was with us in our abolition panel, and that was really good conversation. And I'm excited to hear this conversation as well. Regina is a Panay organizer who has lived in the Inland Empire for over 15 years and whose organizing spans across the Southern California region. She recently graduated from an Asian American Studies degree with UC Santa Barbara, where she organized with API and Filipino youth through programs and organizations such as FIERCE, Filipinas in Education, Reaffirming Community Empowerment, and ANACBAI in Santa Barbara. Regina has since returned to serve her community as an ally with the Inland Empire Immigrant Youth Collective, a grassroots, undocumented youth-led organization that provides services and resources to the immigrant community. We know them very well and love those folks. When Regina is not organizing, she enjoys reading, journaling, reading tarot cards, and reconnecting with nature. So Regina, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to this work, and also share with us your ancestral family history and land acknowledgement.
Thank you again for the introduction, Mary. I'm excited to once again be on this next panel with you all here today. So for my land acknowledgement, I'm from Riverside, California, so occupying Cahuilla, Serrano land out here. And then for my ancestral lands, my father's family is from Luzon, which is the northern island of the Philippines, so from Ilocano land. And then on my mom's side, she's from the southernmost region of the Philippines in Mindanao. And so we're honoring Visayan folks, and also just want to take a moment to honor the indigenous peoples of the Philippines as well, the Lumad, the Manobo, the Ifugao, and many other indigenous tribes and groups out there, and honoring their collective struggle for freedom as well. And so in this introduction, as it says here, I'm a Pinay Filipino organizer. And I guess I started in this work, like officially, I guess, also in college. I think I started like in high school, and like I guess I could say that my consciousness was starting to grow then, but I didn't really understand or like have the tools that were necessary to like put it all into perspective and name everything, right? And so when I was at UCSB, I organized with FIERCE, and so bringing ethnic studies into youth education programs, right? And really advocating for that, pushing for that. I graduated with an ethnic studies degree in Asian American studies, so just learning about our collective histories, right? And like how important it is that we as people of color learn our own histories and how that impacts our identities today. movement today, right? And I also founded Anakbayan in Santa Barbara, and so which is a progressive grassroots Filipino youth organization that has multiple chapters everywhere across the world, fighting for liberation in the Philippines. And I also organize with IIYC to end immigration detention and bring justice for our immigrant and undocumented communities here in Inland Empire. So really excited to be here today and talk about bamboo ceiling and our how it affects like our women, femmes, and LGBTQ plus folks here. So very excited to be here with my fellow panelists.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for being here. So much gratitude for your participation, and especially you, Regina. You know, we took your whole day today. Like, I think we gave you like a half-hour lunch. I hope you ate something. And I'm saying that as I munch on fruit snacks. But let's dive right into our first question. Earlier in the month, as we mentioned before, we had some amazing speakers, by the way, who talked about the model minority myth. And, they really dived into a lot with that, like intersecting it with Black community, Brown community, LGBTQ community. But we wanted to have a deeper dive and really talk about, how do you believe that women, femme, and or queer folks are also specifically impacted by this issue even further? And so know that many of the folks in the room, have probably heard about the model minority myth, but maybe not everyone. So you might want to just talk on that real briefly. But then really getting to the piece about how it's impacting, femme folk and LGBTQIA folk and folk even, more. And I know many of you come from a lens of mental health, so we can also.
Mary, you froze, at least for me. But I think that gives us a good opportunity to hand it off to our panelists. I'm actually going to stop sharing so that we can see your lovely faces. And last time we were able to share the questions in the chat just so folks could review it as we went. But to our three panelists, who would any of you like to maybe start with that question or start addressing that question? Mary, feel free to jump back in at any point.
Sorry, we've been having internet outages in San Bernardino, so that probably will happen again. And thanks for pitching in. But yeah, go ahead.
I could start, or
No,
Nicole,
go
unless you
ahead,
feel
go ahead.
inclined. Okay, that's totally fine. So with the model minority myth, right, it's this idea that Asian Americans, AAPI folks are seen, like the title suggests, as the model minority. That despite being a minority, despite being a person of color, that we aim very successfully in life and that we achieve a lot of successes considered in comparison to other minority folks, right? But it's really a divisive way to look at the community because really it just pits the minority groups against one another, right? And so there's this idea that again that we are meant to accomplish all these things expected of us, and even a lot of folks think that like, okay, well, why is that harmful, right? Why is it harmful to believe that AAPI folks are very successful, right? But it puts a lot of pressure on us to really meet those expectations. And not only that, if we don't meet them, we're kind of seen as like, what is wrong with you, right? A lot of times too, our own personal struggles, our own personal efforts into achieving our success is minimized and is dismissed, right? Like I don't know how many times I've been told, growing up in school where I may be struggling to study for a math class. I hate math. I'm very much a social science person. That's why I'm looking to go into social work and not be a statistician, right? But either way, when I would talk about my struggles of maybe studying for a math exam, they're like, oh, you're fine, you're Asian. It's just in your blood, right? And that, again, just really minimizes my own struggles in trying to understand math, which, I have my fair share of struggles as anybody else. And with that too, in terms of LGBTQ perspective, again, the model minority myth really um, creates a lot of erasure for individuality, again, the personal struggles, the different nuance and complexities of each of our own stories. So when we don't fit this norm, right, especially as a queer person, it's hard for us to want be our true selves because we don't fit this mold. We're not perceived to be what others see us to be. And I'll start with that and I'll hand it off.
I want to build on top of your point, Kevin, as well as I want to build on top of like one of the keynote speakers that happened this whole month, David, about the model minority myth and expanding a little bit on that. And so with the model minority myth, it is very divisive, as Kevin has said. And what they also have said is that it pits model minority groups. As it pits model minority groups, it absolves the person, the institution that created the divisiveness, the conflict in the first place. And so, it's not challenging everyone within the conflict to really look at the bigger picture that it's white supremacy, it's imperialism, it's bureaucrat capitalism that's really pitting us all together as we are fighting for the quote unquote scarcity of resources. If we ever look towards the top, the leadership, the top corporations, there is such a big abundance of resources we have, from land to food to sea and everything in between. But because we live in a capitalistic system, there is this idea that we fall into that there is a lot of scarcities, but we don't realize the reason why it is getting scarce is that it's being polluted, it's being corrupted. And so it's not, so as we're talking about the model minority myth, I really want to challenge us, or like continue or retain this idea that we have to ensure that as who do we need to question, and why is the system in here in the first place? Why is model minority myth created in the first place? And how does it impact us on day-to-day lives? For me specifically, as Kevin, again, building off your point, you're so good at your initiative. I love it. Where it minimizes our struggles, and everyone assumes that Asians succeed well. It leaves out who isn't in that category, who isn't in that room, who isn't in that label. We see that as we see like Asian success stories, a lot of them are celebrities, or a lot of them are doctors. In my personal experiences, some of them I never seen any support or recognition or acknowledgement or appreciation for Filipina caregivers, or for the mom and pop grocery store workers, or for the fact that they're restaurant owners, or for the fact that they are domestic workers, or teachers, or custodian staff. And so how does that model minority myth fit us then? Does it only fit the fact that we have to play certain specific roles, that every year that I grew up, it's only of this year that we're getting turning red, or we're getting everything and everywhere at once? Where I was growing up, we all had, I remember the flickers of screen of Lucy Liu on Charlie's Angel playing a tiger woman, playing a very dominant, sexy icon. I also remember Kevin Jong playing the butt of the joke every time. And so if we were to quote unquote look into the mainstream representation, or what has been accepted based on the model minority myth, to, David said we have to look as a good citizen. Good citizen doesn't just mean like, oh, we're upstanding, we have passed all the tests, we have our driver's license, we have good jobs. It also means we have to be silent. It also means that we shouldn't create conflict, that we should just accept the job as it is because it's all for survival, that we should accept the stereotypes as it is because we have to, we need to live here to work here. Which, even if we live here to work here, we have the United States has historically been oppressing us as they are silencing us. The internment camps, the natural citizenship, the Korean adoption industrial complex, and everything in between. And so that's how so as we're as so that minimizes those collective struggles, those historical issues, and how that impacts mental health is, whew, if you go to UC and you ask the Asian, I swear to God, they'll all tell you, oh, imposter syndrome across the board. Ooh. And so um or that, we don't look into that there is intergenerational conflict. There's a lot of trauma, there's a lot of anxiety inherited from finances, all the way to the migration struggle, all the way from politics. And so I really want to put a pause on there and give up the floor to Reggie to add more onto this.
Right, thank you. Kind of hard to follow up from Kevin and Nicole, but I'm gonna try to keep adding on to the nuances of the model minority myth. Emphasis on myth because it's not real, nor should it be applied to categorizing and racializing our people that are categorized under the pan-ethnic term of Asian Pacific Islander, which is also quite harmful, right? Because it's erasing Pacific Islander and Native Hawaiian struggles, right? That I also just want to, recognize aren't here right now to talk about their experiences and their issues, and to encourage folks here in the room to seek out that education and to seek that information out for themselves as well. We'll also be providing resources at the end too, but I also want to talk about, the archetypes of the model minority myth and how it affects women and femmes, right? Like we've seen the lotus blossom archetypes and the dragon lady archetypes, and most like recently it's like turned into like, Asian women and femmes in professional fields, right, and stuff. And I think it's also like very much so rooted in like our historical context. And so I know Nico brought up Japanese internment and stuff, and I kind of want to shift the word internment into incarceration, because that's honestly what it was Japanese and Japanese American groups during World War II were incarcerated against their will by the American government. And so that's really where we see this model minority myth coming out, right? Is after World War II, and the US is really trying to rebuild their image and show that the world that they're not racist, that they actually care about their immigrant communities, right? And so they create this model minority myth and label Asian Americans with that, right? And so I think it's important to identify that historical context too, in which this is coming out, because it's also intersecting with the Immigration Act of 1965, which, it like relaxed immigration policies up until that point, and it prioritized family reunification and also skilled laborers, right? And so I want to bring it also back to what Nico is bringing up about how we're not highlighting Filipino or Asian domestic workers or restaurant workers or blue collar positions, right? And so it's also bringing up the question of what is skilled labor, because I'm gonna tell y'all this right now. When I'm looking at like garment workers out in LA, domestic workers here and abroad, that shit is not easy. It's not easy I don't even know how to sew. I don't even know the first thing about, caregiving for someone professionally and like in an efficient way. So it's really like racializing these positions and the positionality of women and femmes, like specifically, like from my own experience too, that is very harmful. And it's being reproduced constantly in our society right now. And I'm also going to bring up, the Asian hate crimes against Asian women who were unfortunately killed during the I believe it was 2020 massacre and stuff, and just how they, like in the media and stuff, reading and hearing about how they were portrayed as just, spa workers or blue collar workers, but they're so much more than that, right? And that's what the model minority myth does, is it erases people's lived experiences and their very real identities and how it interacts with all of these oppressive structures that need to be abolished.
Yes, abolish it all. um, When we thought about this panel, we thought about, of course, femme thought and queer thought, but we also, wanted to center youth thought, and so the next question is kind of getting to that as a young person, and this could be you now or you as an adolescent, like you can think back to your youngest years. Did your observation of parents, of grandparents, or other elders in your community impact your ability to be your true self fully? And if so, like how did it help you or challenge you as you moved into your adult years, and especially, thinking of identity in mind and thinking of, the minority myth and the model minority myth, and thinking of, where you're at today in terms of your identity and your culture?
I think, can I go? You want to go, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay. So I grew up in a Catholic conservative household, and I was told multiple times how to be a female. Of when it comes to closing your legs when I'm wearing a skirt, to not understanding there's a certain, I had an aunt that taught me how to walk with my hip popping out, and I was like, why? And so I have very certain memories growing up on how to be a woman. And this transformed into, as I was going to high school, of where I was very distinctly reminded and emphasized and every day that I am also a Filipino woman. And um, I think my middle school years, everyone understood I was Asian because I can count on my three fingers how many Asians were in my classroom, one of them including me. And we get to the Mesopotamian chapter, and someone's like, "Oh, look, Nicole, that's you." Or the Asian chapter, and generalized all Asia, and it's like, "Oh, look, Nicole, that's you." And I'm like, bro, I'm Filipino. Like, what's up?" um, and so distinctly remembering how very harmful actually, being recognized as the only Asian person in the classroom, and then how many, especially in the IE, that doesn't have, when I was growing up, that didn't have the most accurate representation of Asian representation. Um, I said representation twice, sorry. That it was very wrong, and that it was very based on, at the time, the internet, as I was surrounded by a lot of nerds, and but most of my high schoolers, the way they understood my Asian identity was through anime, was through manga, was through I'm going to be very provocative, Pornhub. And so I was exotified and objectified at a very young age, where it was very easy as for me who grew up on the side of YouTube, where I got to see Wong Fu Productions and Ryan Higa, and got to see very positive videos on the Asian American playing the main role. On the other hand, my friends did not have that, or my student class did not have that. And most of the time when I was dating a white person, or I had compliments towards me, it was they were objectifying, sexualizing my body. Sometimes it was in that yellow fever type of language too as well. And so it was very harmful, that to the point that it's still very traumatic for me to unpack it. I had to go to therapy to really look into why am I playing into a stereotype that's based on how sexy I am, how willing I am to serve people, how willing I am to be submissive, how willing I am to be silent, how willing I am to to not be loud, to not be bold, to not call out, to not critique. And so the way that I saw the model minority myth now, especially when I can see it reflect in my childhood and teenhood to adulthood, is that I was an unfortunate victim of the fact of objectification, and to points that I'm fighting for, my mental health, because it really transforms your social relationships, your dating relationships too as well. And I never really, I think this is the first year I told one of my aunts about my dating history, and even to this day, my whole family except for myself has a very healthy dating history. But for me, myself, I didn't. I didn't have, which was specifically tied to my identity.
Thank you so much for lifting that up. And I really want to call out something you're saying, which is about fetishing, right? Fetishing. And normally when we talk about fetishing, folks, I hear a lot of discourse about it with Black community. I hear a lot of discourse about it with, Native community as we talk about missing and murdered Indigenous women. I do not hear a lot of discourse about it when we talk about API community. And it is a thing, and that the yellow fever thing you're talking about is a thing, and also tied to a lot of imperialism, right? So, the kind of like, soldiers at war and having a girl in every port and that whole narrative, So, like, I just really want to thank you for lifting that up. And Kevin?
Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna first touch upon the objectification part first, because that's what we're talking about. And that's honestly, I could talk about it all day, but then I'll go back to the original question too. But with that, in terms of being queer and being Asian, having that intersecting identities, you're not really welcomed in both spaces. And so a lot of queer Asian folks have to pick and choose which identity that they're going to be presenting or which battles that they want to choose for that day, right? So in terms of objectification, fetishization in the dating world as a queer Asian person myself, I've experienced so much prejudice and unfortunately discrimination as well. And I know it's not like my only experience too, but this is a shared experience amongst many queer Asians, is that, again, we're not accepted as queer in our Asian communities with our families or the culture. We're also not accepted as Asian in the queer community as well. When I would be on dating apps, right? People would explicitly say no fats, no femmes, no Asians, right? And let me dig into that first part first more, no fats. And specifically what they meant by that is if you didn't have washboard 8-pack abs, you were fat. So if you had a regular, typical average body, whatever that means, right, you weren't seen as desirable. Not only that, especially AAPI folks were seen as, Nicole said, subservient, submissive, right? And so, and also as feminine. Those are associated as feminine traits. And so just simply existing to be Asian, people already had ideas of how I would act, how I would behave, how I would speak, and they didn't want any part of it, right? On these dating apps, my own personal experience, I wouldn't have my picture up for many reasons, for privacy, for my own protection, right? And I would engage in conversation with other folks. And as soon as they do receive a picture of me, or they do know of my ethnic background, I've been explicitly told no Asians. And that was the end of the conversation. And I was like, okay, is this going to be an educational moment or am I just going to fight back? So I tried to bridge this connection with this person and let them know, hey, you know what? There's other ways for you to let people know that you're not attracted to them. That's not based off your racial perception of me. And I encourage you to really unpack that, right? And it was just strange because I was really taken back by that it was so explicit. I brought it to social media and I did a poll on my Instagram. I asked folks, do you believe that having a racial preference, is that fetishization? Is it racist? Is it wrong? What are your thoughts? And it's either that we are rejected or that we are fetishized, because I would have people reach out to me for support and just say, the opposite. And they think they're doing well by saying these things, but they're not. They say things like, oh, I don't know why they would treat you like that. I love dating Asian people, right? Or I just love Asian people in general. It's like, okay, well, so, you're fetishizing me, right? You have these ideas of who I am. Like, yes, I am Asian. That's not all that I am, right? I offer many other qualities too, but you design me solely based off that. I encourage you to also unpack that. So I digress on that part. But in terms of the initial question, what was it like on my own identity forming, seeing my elders in my family, right? So looking at my grandmother, she raised 6 children and quickly had to again leave the country and sought refuge in the States. So seeing her, I always saw that she had to give up her whole life, everything that she knew, right? For the safety of her children, for a better opportunity for them. And with my mom coming into the States as a teenager, she had to assimilate. So not only did she have to deal with the racial prejudice that existed, but then she also had to learn English and learn about the culture and then learn about the education system and how to navigate moving into a career that would have been sustainable for her, right? So I see that her struggle with that. And when it came to me wanting to develop my own identity and what paths I want to take my own personal career, I didn't really have a choice. I was told what I was going to be studying. I was told exactly, I had a whole timeline. I had like a 10-year plan that was handed to me that said, you're going to go to school, you're going to be a radiology technologist, you're going to, because they make good money, right? It's stable, it's a good career. And then while you finish that, you're also going to go to medical school and then become a radiologist. And I was like, okay, that sounds good to me, right? But it wasn't really what I wanted to do. And even if I tried to introduce the idea of being a nurse, because my mom is a nurse and a couple others are in my family are also nurses, I wasn't even allowed to pursue that because I wasn't allowed to do anything that was either on the same level or below what was already accomplished before me. So I wasn't encouraged to be a nurse, even though it is a great career to follow. I was encouraged to be a doctor or a lawyer or something else, something that's prestigious, right? So I wasn't allowed to make those individual choices of my own. And not only that, I had expectations to surpass what was, again, accomplished before me. And I remember when I went to community college and I sat down with like a school counselor, they asked me what I wanted to study. And I said, well, my mom says that I want to do this. That's why I'm going to this college because you offer this program, blah, 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 right? And they were like, they stopped me right there and they said, look, I have so many students who come in here and their parents tell them what they want to do. You're going to change that 10 times before you figure out what you really want to do. You might as well start now and just do what you want to do. What do you want to study? And I said, I want to study psychology. I've always been fascinated with the human brain and just mental processes and all that. And so at that time, because I was fresh out of high school and I didn't drive, my parents were waiting for me in the parking lot for me to come out of this meeting. And so when I got back into the car, they were like, how did that go? Did you get the prerequisites for the program? I said, no, I'm going to study psychology. And oh my goodness, were they so upset with me. And it took many years for them to kind of accept that this is my path and this is one that I chose, that I want to live my life as, right? And even when I've told other people, I used to serve at the Cheesecake Factory throughout college just to pay my bills and just to pay things for myself, right? Like many of us college students do. And when folks asked me what I was studying, I said I wanted to study psychology, but they were like, there's no money in that. And also, why don't you want to be a doctor or something? And so that kind of just fueled my fire more to be like, forget you. Like I'm doing what I want to do. I don't care about the money. It's about the work for me, right? And so for me and finding my own identity, I've had to be rebellious to society, to my own family, what was instilled in me, right? Just for me to truly authentically be myself. So even now and today, I still have to do some inner work, right, to kind of undo all those expectations that were held upon me. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Kevin. I really relate to that. Like, we have a coalition called Casamas y Carnales, where we talk about the similarities a lot between Brown community and Filipino community. And that's one of them right there. Like, I really, really relate to that. Regina.
All right, so lots to unpack, as Kevin said. And so I'll start like from my own personal experience. I grew up first generation Filipina here in the US after like migrating back from the Philippines and stuff. And so I kind of just want to say how like I guess like the impact my parents and older folks in my family and my community like impacted my identity and how I viewed myself and stuff. And so from a really young age, I genuinely believe that I was policed like by my parents, by my grandparents, by elders, right? I was policed for my personality, for my body, just for the fact that I was a girl, right? And so I'm also the youngest girl in my family, and the only girl, um, which is like a lot of weight to carry, right, in the immigrant Filipino family. And so it resulted in a lot of different things happening in my life, right? Like I still to this day suffer from body dysmorphia because my family was like, you're about you're fat, or like you are. I was just so policed everywhere, like at family parties, like we talked about this earlier about like big Filipino parties, everyone comes through, right? It's like a whole big thing. And then just aunties coming up to me and saying like, oh, you're eating too much or you're eating too little. And it's like, okay, then what do you want from me? You know, at that point. And so it was also, you know, my personality, like there's this term in the Filipino community, it's called walang hiya. It translates to no shame, right? And it's often used in a derogatory way against Filipino women, where it's like, wala kang hiya, like you have no shame in who you are as a person, and that you should be shameful, and that you should carry that shame with you every single day of your life at every single moment. And that's the way that the world works. And so I carried that with me for a very long time. And it's still something that, you know, I still have to heal from to this day, right? It's a lot of anxiety and stuff, and um, really has affected the way I view myself and my family, right? Because how can your own family, who's supposed to love you unconditionally, say these things to you and make you feel this way and put you in that binary position, you know? And so after, you know, years and years of being constantly defined by others and by a community and by my family, um, I think I just had enough, you know, enough is enough at some point, right? And I think, you know, it was really important for me to reclaim that term, walang hiya, to not live your life in shame, because, you know, we're, as a woman, as a femme, and as a Filipina, it's really hard, right? To live with that shame every day, but to also reclaim it, right? To reclaim that term, reclaim who you are as a person, and find who you are, find what your identity is outside of what people are telling you to be, right? Because ultimately you belong to you first. You don't belong to your parents or your grandparents or to a degree, to academia, to work, right? You're your own person first, and there's no shame in that, and there should be no shame in that.
Oh, thank you so much for that. Regina, this is the third time you've made me cry in the two panels today. Okay, so let's go to our next question. And you heard us mention that we're going to do some movie viewings and, you know, have some platicas and conversations about media, you know. So that's what this question it goes to. Media has a profound influence on cultural stereotypes related to the model minority myth. Can you explain how media, and this includes, you know, internet, TV, film, someone mentioned YouTube, you know, like, has impacted your understanding of how the world views API community, including yourself? And what can we do to counteract any negative impacts from this kind of media influence? And that can be like what we can do as academic institutions, what can we do as educators, but also what can we do as family members? Like you're mentioning, you know, how can family do that, put us in the binary? You know, like I think we have a lot of learning to do, not just as institutions, but as people, right? As loved ones, as friends and allies and accomplices. Like, what can we do? Who wants to go first?
I can start. Let's go in a different order this time around. But yeah, I think I first want to start out with like just a critique, right, of media and how it represents Asian Pacific Islanders, right, in the community, and say that it's it's good to, you know, it's good to advocate for more representation, right? Like moving away from these stereotypes and archetypes that are, you know, placed onto us and stuff like that. But I also just want to offer the critique that media representation isn't everything, right? And it can only go so far, and it's actually like very limiting in the power that it does have, because at the end of the day, that cultural hegemony and control of what is being represented in the media is controlled by ruling classes and by oppressive regimes. So just going to put that out there first. But I like to recognize that we do have a lot of, API creatives that are doing amazing work and pursuing their dreams that go against the model minority myth. So I want to applaud them as well. But just understanding those nuances, right? That and complexities that media representation offers for people of color in general, right? And yeah, I think also I just want to highlight that, a lot of these stories that and experiences that that I've heard like on the ground and stuff, and are just not highlighted, right? Like I don't see immigrant Asian women, as garment workers on TV or in movies. And I also want to highlight that, them, I don't see like, immigrants that are being detained on TV either, right? Like they're not being represented. And like that's a very real part of this community that is not being represented in the media as well. And so I also wanted to highlight that, I guess, in media and like how it impacted myself and how I continue to view myself, right? And I guess like like some things that are tangible that folks can do is just continue to think critically, right? Like when Nicole said, like we have Turning Red, we have Everything Everywhere All at Once, right? And we can see that there's very much recurring themes happening in these different media representations, but just continue to think critically and challenge what's being presented in front of you, right? Like, and don't just take it at face value, because that, like, I'm going to reference Aladdin, for example, back in the day. People love that shit because it's Disney and because it's a Disney princess and all this stuff. And it's glamour and it's red carpet and all this stuff. But it also, highlights the very harmful stereotypes that Asian people have to go through, and they're orientalized and are, constantly in this dichotomy of their, in a juxtaposition against white supremacy and white communities, right? And so just wanted to highlight that and just say that that's something where you can start with and continue to educate yourself and learn your histories, right? No history, no self. No history, no self. Those two terms can be interchanged, right? And you can learn a lot about yourself when you learn your histories and the experiences that people in your community hold, and also apply that to whatever you want represented in media, whatever that means to you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and
Go ahead, Kevin.
sorry, I wanted to jump in. So I totally agree with Regina about how, having representation, it's can only go so far, right? Because, yes, you do want representation, but at the same time, you don't want to tokenize the folks doing the work too, right? And not only just in media, but just in everything, it's exhausting to have to constantly have to explain yourself or explain your experiences, right? So for allies, it's the part that Regina said, educating yourself is so crucial, right? I said that I'm an LGBTQ encyclopedia, and for me that works because it's quite literally my job. But your queer friend, your AAPI friend, is not your queer or AAPI personal encyclopedia, right? Do the work within yourself. And there is resources for you to learn about these complex, experiences on your own, right? And then that's when you can maybe follow up with some questions once you have that basic understanding, because even the way that you ask things and engage in conversations can be very microaggressive, right? And we have to always constantly check our microaggressions too, even though I personally believe there's nothing micro about microaggression, right? But with that, you have to try to really just continually put in the effort to try to uncondition what you think challenge everything that you think right? We all have a bias. Leave your ideas and your preconceptions of us at the door. A lot of times with representation, how I think personally it could and should be handled is that if you want a queer, for example, queer Asian space, it needs to be curated and for queer Asian folks, right? Which is what we're getting to about the bamboo ceiling, you know, that we need to have folks in leadership to that can really attest to and speak on their own personal experiences and handle these sensitive topics, because it could be misrepresented and do more harm than actual good, right? There's so many stereotypes of what it means to be Asian in the media. And while it's okay to laugh and it's okay to have dark humor, we got to really look at the impacts, especially when it comes to youth who are trying to understand and learn about, you know, different cultures or different folks of different backgrounds. I'll bring up one specific example. I don't know if folks here are familiar with the movie Love, Simon, but when that first came out, you know, my friends were like, my friend allies were all like, "Oh, I'm so excited to see that. Like, you know, how do you feel about it? Do you want to go see it?" And I'm like, quite honestly, I don't want to see it, because it was you know, it was a white gay male, right? And I don't feel represented in that experience. And not only that, the movie was really about coming out, which again, coming out is just really just one part of the LGBTQ experience. There are so many other things of the LGBT experience. We don't have to constantly have movies about coming out. There again, like whether it's about the bamboo ceiling itself, how to, you know, succeed in these positions, you know, our experience is more than just hiding a part of ourselves and then trying to be accepted. It's much more nuanced than that. And so I'll leave it at that.
I want to build on top of both of y'all's points. Those are really good points. And I'm in full agreement too, as well, that we should be taking with a grain of salt about media representation. And so it is very limited. If we think about the impact of media, especially throughout the histories, post 9/11, there was a lot of ever since those, and Regina brought up Aladdin, I brought up the internet in my earlier question, in my earlier response. We have to scrutinize the impact of what has media representation done for us. It has increased and escalated violence against us. And even if, you know, I can think of instances where, like with Aladdin, it escalated violence against Muslims, and Muslims are often geographically considered part of Asia, and no one knew that. But everyone who had some sort of like proximity or awareness that they lived next to someone that was Muslim, there was a lot of escalation of violence and harassment towards them. But you also have to consider that there were reality TV shows, like if y'all remember 90 Day Fiance and All About Rose and Ed, that Filipina who was on the TV show and slated to have a love line with Ed to see if they were compatible. The way the internet, specifically Twitter, like was enraged how Ed was very misogynistic, was racist, and was very, very downright weird about, especially with the light hair. How that game resurged the idea of the mail order bride against Filipinos. And so, like, you know, if we think about cultural stereotypes in media representation, we have to understand that as much as for every Lucy Liu, for every Turning Right, for every Crazy Rich Asian, there was also TV series. There's also a lot of there's somewhere in Hollywood that's Insidious that's working against hiring or putting up stories of like Asian accurate Asian stories, or Asian Pacific Islander stories, or making fun of it or mocking it. I want to specifically point out some other instances of, like, you know, worldviews towards the API community. Is that, you know, Regina brought up erasure. That's especially true. If we there was a lot of critiques when it comes to Crazy Rich Asians. As much as I was fond of seeing Kina Grannis on the screen and singing "Can't Help But Falling in Love with You," I was also very I guess I wasn't in love with the storyline. It didn't feel like my accurate storyline. It didn't feel like I remember all of Asian celebrities were just like, "This is the movie of the year. We got to make it big. We got to do it like Black Panther." When but when you talk to elderly Asians, when you talk to your parents, when you talk to working class APIs, they didn't really have that same love and energy towards Crazy Rich Asians as like was with Black Panther. And that isn't to say like, oh yeah, Asian people don't support Asian people. No, I hear both sides of the stories where yes, it's amazing to have representation. It's lovely to see us on screen, to have like, someone that actually looks like us without the plastic surgery, without the white skin whitening stuff. But also at the same time, when you talk about to immigrants, they're like, yeah, we've seen it. It's in the motherland. There's good and bad sides. There's nuances to that. Some played villains, some didn't. Some like took away my job, forced more immigration towards me, and so but the underlying thing between these both opinions is that we're looking for authenticity and accuracy. You can't solely celebrate just because you see an Asian on screen, just because you see an LGBTQIA plus on screen doesn't mean, you know, the cast and production just didn't do it for our diversity quota. And like the roles and the stories that they're playing isn't is unproblematic, is celebratory to, and it's worth the celebration. Um, and so when we think about like I think like Zoomers and everyone of this generation should be a lot more grateful. No, not should not be, but y'all have a lot more access to like a lot of Asian directors, actors, producers, writers, as well as those who are aiming for leadership, politicians, aiming for just to protect folks in policies. I was a part of. I see a letter coming around about like having May 10th as honored as like API Mental Health Fund. Mental Health Day. So there is we should not just allow our liberations to stop at representation just because we got it. How do we keep representation, whether it's on screen or off the screen, accountable to serving us in for our justices and our rights? And so when it comes to tangible things to counteract with that, I think it's best to continue to seek out that knowledge. As Kevin and Regina said, I'm going to emphasize that too. It's very important to, hit up your API center, hit up going to those workshops, hearing those stories, and maybe just sit in an API class if offered, or any workshop if offered. It's the most easiest and quickest and probably the accessible way you can do that, especially as we are in this day and age of doing virtual and in-person stuff today. It's very you can just pop it on, sit it on, have a podcast, and there's a lot of podcasts going around that even if you think like, oh, what if it's the wrong person, what if it's the wrong thing, I don't want to get it wrong. Cool. That means they're showing you not every story is the same, not everything is a monolith, and so you're going to be hearing different things, different perspectives, but you might hear a lot of similarities and patterns. And so just maybe there's a silver lining to all of that, and that when you look into these negative impacts and you see all these protests or like these Twitter rages about like, this isn't accurate, this isn't represented, like, why is this on TV? Good. Have Hollywood hear you. Who cares if you're, like, when I said, like, don't let your liberation stop representation. Liberation also includes advocacy, also includes those protests, and also includes those organized complaints to HR, because you are making sure like the most accessible thing to the United States citizens, residents at this moment is everything on their screen, is from Netflix, it's from YouTube, it's from TV, and making sure that, this isn't something to be posted out, take it down. It's possible just to like take anything down with enough noise, enough loudness, and it's more possible to uplift and support everybody else who are trying to make it and break that ceiling. And so there's my point about it.
Yes. I'm going to add a question, and something we probably should have done in the first panel as well. But I really want to end on a note where we are uplifting the things that you care about. So bring us home to, what are the issues you're working on now currently? What are the impacts that you see for LGBTQ community, for femme thought, for model minority myth, for API community, for immigrant community, like all of these things that you've so eloquently articulated and touched on and like kind of opened up our minds to seeing where these intersect, right? Because at the end of the day, this whole workshop is an example of how all of this intersects, right? So where do you, when people leave this workshop, what do you want them to go out and do, like action oriented, about these issues that you've been talking about today?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I wanted to quickly jump into what Nico said because there was a point that she made, and it's about listening, and it goes into your question too. And I can't say this enough, that if you want to be an ally to somebody, you need to listen, and just that. Like, not just that, but like when you're there in the moment, stop trying to justify that you're an ally. Stop trying to tell us how much of an ally you are. That doesn't do anything for me, for you to tell me that you accept me, that you're putting in the work. Like, okay, that's great, but where are your actions, right? And so, when I do these allyship workshops and I talk to folks, I tell people that, your allyship card, it ends every day at midnight, because every day is a fight for human rights, for social equity, right? Because you have to constantly do the work. And even myself, even as a person who identifies within the community, I have to constantly check myself and my bias, right? I'm not of the trans experience. I'm not of the lesbian experience. So as much as I can advocate for those issues, I have to do a lot of listening first, right? And I have to do those action things. With that, something related to the LGBTQ community and where I feel like a lot of folks struggle with is the language that we use, right? I didn't do a good example of doing this myself, but I didn't tell everybody here what my pronouns were, right? My pronouns are they, them, and I also use he, him pronouns. But even just something as simple as that, right, is an action item that everyone here can take. That wherever you are in your meetings, when you're meeting somebody for the first time, don't assume just based on how you look at them what their pronouns are going to be. Just because they may express themselves, whether they have long hair, whether short hair, where they may wear makeup, whether they're they wear a skirt or they don't. However they express themselves does not always accurately depict of what their gender identity is. So, being mindful of that language, right? And I've gotten a lot of resistance, as you could imagine, trying to advocate for these things. And folks are like, well, why are you trying to make everybody gender neutral and all those things? And that's not what I'm trying to do, right? Like, folks can feel on the binary system of gender one way or the other. That's completely valid if you feel completely cis male or cis female or trans male or trans female, right? But there's also gender variant folks. And what I mean by gender neutral language is just being mindful that not everybody adheres to this binary system of gender. So, using they, them pronouns until explicitly stated that their pronouns are otherwise, right? But not only that, if someone tells you that their pronouns aren't they, them, or that they're actually she, her, even though many folks may perceive them as a he, him, making sure that you use that too, and not just defaulting to the they, them because it's easier. Because I've also caught myself doing that, just because I use they, them pronouns for particular folks, that is still misgendering, because I'm not affirming their gender identity by acknowledging the pronouns that they use, right? So, and I know that's a difficult concept. It can be a very difficult concept to grasp because, language is always changing. Things that were used as slurs in the past have now been reclaimed by the community, and vice versa, right? So again, the importance of continually educating yourself, because things do change and they change quick. And it is so apparent, at least for me, and I know other colleagues too, is that when we're conversing with folks, even though they may not be explicitly saying things that might be, again, outwardly or overtly oppressive, you can tell by the language they use of how much work they've done to being a true ally, right? Again, even though I use mixed pronouns, they, them, he, him, I will tell you that more than 90% of the time, I'm never referred to as they, them, unless it's from my close friends or close family who knows how much that really means to me to affirm my gender identity. right? And a lot of times folks may ask me like, why don't you say something? I'm like, because it's exhausting. I don't have to, I shouldn't have to always explain myself in that sense, right? So again, I just really challenge all of us to be an ally to any community, to really, really listen. Like Nicole said, there's resources such as, joining cultural committees, there's webinars, there's so many personal testimonies from folks of lived experiences, and we need to really uplift those lived experience too. Meanwhile, quantitative data and research is super important. It's also very limited. So we do have to rely on those lived experiences as well, because these are the true stories being spoken by the people.
Yeah, and I want to uplift that too, what Kevin said about lived experiences. As an organizer, one of the guiding principles are like, actually questions that we keep in mind when it comes to outreaching to like people outside of a grocery store to get them know about our next event, our next program, our next action. What issues are we fighting for? We go in with, how do I respect them? What ways do they want me to respect them? In what ways do we share commonality and similarities? Because although you may see someone who is of the same ethnicity as you might not like vibe or jive together. You might go into a lot more conflict. Or if you see someone who is of different ethnicity, different that are view, maybe you'll find more commonality with them. Um, and then the last thing, which is like towards the point of the end of where Kevin was saying like about listening, it is very important to go in with that question, is like, how do I support you? It's as in, when you think of when I see allyship, when Kevin hits a good point, it's like, how do I? There's a lot of people that interrupts those who are of the vulnerable, marginalized communities, just saying like, oh yeah, I'm doing this, like giving me or giving them their resume, and which is like goes counterproductive as an organizer, because I don't go up to people and like say, oh yeah, here's my resume, here's all the protests I've been at, here's all the rallies I've done, here's all the movements I've done. No, that doesn't reach people. What reaches people is you being an active listener and letting them be your story, letting them being storyteller in your life. I can tell you many times when I'm like, especially in my organization as Gabriella, how many stories we come across people who said, thank you. I never thought someone would care about me. I never thought someone would care about the fact that my rights are being violated. I never thought I would come across somebody um, who I think who carries that I might be a victim of income wage theft, or I might be a victim of microaggressions, or I might be a victim of misogyny. I might be a victim of homophobia. Um, where your allyship is actually helping us navigate and affirm our experiences and making and figuring out like, okay, where can we go? How do we brainstorm? What do we do now with these actions? Um, so with that in mind, one of the calls, so that's like a personal call to action that, or actually a practice that y'all can do in everyday life when it comes to like meeting folks and like lived experiences. Let me tell you, not everyone's lived experiences is on social media. It's not in the films, it's not in the movies, it's not in the writing, it's not always there. So you do have to, get out, have a Zoom call with someone, have a coffee talk with someone, meet someone outside of like your grocery store, meet your cashier. Like, they'll give you a full breadth of experiences if they can, and if they have the energy for it. And you'll see whether you have a lot of similarities or differences, or in ways of like, okay, I see you struggling. I'm gonna see how what my access as an ally to the resources that I have can I do to help you. Because if allies, when it comes to checking your privileges, one of the most important things when you check your privileges is what access do you have? And that's, I think, what people forget. It's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna check my privilege. I'm white. And I'm like, okay, now what? Now what? What am you know what? I'm aware what the possible implicit biases you might have, but how will that further uplift me from my struggle? Um, so really, when you check in your privileges, you make sure you check those what access do you have to make sure you're uplifting those of the vulnerable, marginalized communities, and how to uplift their struggle, how to uplift them out of their struggles. In terms of where I am doing, so you see this lovely Zoom background. It says Reject Marcos Duterte and like Filipino clean and honest elections. And so currently in the Philippines and here in the diaspora, we are rejecting the current elected president and vice president based on and this is actually this can inspire y'all as if you're as scholars too, because the election was based on fake news, history revisionism, misinformation, voter disenfranchisement, voter buying, and so here in the diaspora, here in the United States, and also in the Philippines, we're working in solidarity with those in the Philippines of really organizing ourselves to be to strategically target government authority for the U.S. to hold the Philippines the elected president and elected VP accountable for all their actions, and as well as being a part of a corrupt political dynasties, and then for in front of the Philippines ambassadors to make sure that they're serving the people well, that they're upholding and they're protecting our rights and justices too as well. And so this is a photo of demonstration of a larger campaign of where we are actually trying to protect all the documented and more so lived experiences of everyone going through the elections, as well as from those who were a part of the dictatorship from 1965 to 1982. Because one of the most important things when it comes to lived experiences, especially when you're scholars, is documentation. If you do not have it documented, someone's going to rewrite it, someone's going to tell your other story, and someone's going to manipulate that information to the point where the accuracy of the truth is lost. And so if you really want to get more in touch about like what is going on in my Zoom background, how you can do to help, especially with, how corrupt the politics are. And this political system in the Philippines is actually adopted U.S. politics. So if you're thinking about June 7th elections and how you're going to vote, and what you should be doing, and what lessons you should take from democratic countries who modeled their government after the U.S., go ahead and come talk to me. I can give you some lessons learned, as well as some cautionary tales.
Okay. So Nico and Kevin gave out great resources and things that they're passionate about. And I'm going to echo the same as Nico. If you want to talk about Philippine elections and how it affects Filipino migrants, immigrants, undocumented folks, women, femmes, what have you, you can always reach out to Nico and or myself. We love to talk. We love talking about this stuff. And I also just wanted to talk about, what folks have been talking about on the panel already, which is allyship. And so frequently, and it's so annoying to hear how people who consider themselves allies say that the reason they consider themselves allies is because they are speaking for people who can't speak for themselves. And I'm like, I have to eye roll. I mentally eye roll inside because I'm like, that's not fucking true. Because these communities can speak for themselves. They can, and they are, and they have been. Okay. And that, they have this agency to protect themselves and to uplift themselves, right? That's not the job of an ally to do. And also, you don't get an award for being an ally at the end of the day, like Kevin said. Your allyship card is revoked every 24 hours. It's how you show up every single day to support these people, right? And I myself, I don't identify as undocumented, right? But I work very closely with undocumented youth and communities every single day in our immigrant communities here in the IE, out all over SoCal, right? And I'm just gonna say that as an ally in that space, people don't remember your accomplishments or what you did, right? They remember how you made them feel. And that's ultimately what it means to be an ally, is just to uplift them, right? Make space for them. Don't take up space in their own movements, right? You have to make space for other people in that movement, in that space, to grow and thrive and heal and do what they need to do to reach their liberation and their freedom. And so, with that said, um, I do a lot of work with the Shatan Adelanto Coalition, which is the ice processing center up in the high desert. So if you want to learn more about that, come find me. We also have Know Your Rights workshops with IIYC. If you ever want to learn about how to protect yourself and others in your community, right? It's so important to know your rights when it comes to interacting with police or ICE or CBP or any form of law enforcement, right? And it's very nuanced and complex here in the IE too. So those trainings are really important if you ever want to come learn and educate with us about that. And I also dropped some resources in the chat. And then, funny enough, the resources that I provided for the prison and abolition panel earlier, most of them were written by femmes and by women. And that was kind of on accident, but it wasn't on accident. That most of my education is from femtours and from femmes. So thank you again for having us here today to talk about all of this, and very, very grateful to be in this space with you all.
Really quick, can I add something? Because what was it? Oh, don't let it leave my brain. What was I going to say? Oh, this is what it was. Sorry. So on allyship, it's been a long day. Bear with me. So on allyship, a lot of times when I do my educational workshops, especially with parents, I don't want anyone here to feel super overwhelmed with needing to be an ally. It's super important, yes, and we need more allies, but sometimes we have ideas of what, what it means to be an ally. And so I say this is that, the best way to support somebody is to also recognize that you don't need to know everything about that person, about their lived experiences, right? And I tell parents, like, you don't have to be an expert on gender. I'm not an expert on gender, you don't have to know everything to walk, a journey with somebody, to support them, to love them, right? And what it means to be an ally for each person is different. So, ask that question that was mentioned before. What can I do to support you? Instead of just assuming what people need, right? But ask them directly, do you need support? Do you want me to give you advice? Do you need resources, right? Because we don't need or want all those things at the same time. So it's super important to be present with the folks you are trying to be an ally with.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, my heart is so full with all the wisdom that comes from y'all. Like, I really want to say, as educators, as elders, sometimes we think we know everything and we don't. We need to learn from the youth as much as we put ourselves in a position where we're teaching youth. We need to learn from youth. And y'all have demonstrated that in real time and modeled that in real time today. So thank you. So much love for you all. And I also want to say that, our movement is in good hands, folks. Like, these are the kind of folks that we work with in the community every day. If you've been stuck in the ivory tower and you haven't made it out to the community to support their work on the ground, please do so. Use the resources that are in the chat, and we will email them out to folks who registered, so you can also have those resources, but they need your support. One of the biggest things about community organizing is burnout. And on top of all of this racism and sexism and xenophobia and oppression that we experience in our personal lives, folks who are organizing have this additional burden of doing organizing, community organizing, and trying to make change. So the only way that they can sustain is by having the full support of our communities. And I want to see, I expect to see, I hope to see, I dream to see these three organizers, organizing, 50 years from now and being the badasses that they are today. So thank you all. Let's give them some love in the chat and some love on the screen. And there's moments where I love Zoom because we can be here from afar. And there's moments where I hate Zoom, and that's when we want to show our appreciation because it's so quiet. And I wish I could be there in person to give you hugs and snaps. So know that you have hugs and snaps from me, and I'm sure from many of my colleagues here in the district and on the campus. So I'll pass the mic to Bethany to close us out.
Thank you all so much. And I just want to highlight something that Mary said about, you know, I noticed when we were going over the bios of all three of our panelists that they really spoke to their college experience as a time when they kind of got that spark for activism. And I think that's a responsibility pointing back at us as educators right now to make sure we can foster environments that let people find their voice and let them find their activism. So I'm taking that as like, all right, we got work to do. We got more stuff we have to work on. But I just think that's a really important thing for us to walk away with today is we're responsible for creating these environments for students to find their voices and turn into these beautiful people that we have in front of us. Like we need to foster that. So I want to say thank you so much. I saw lots of shout outs in the chat. You all were amazing. Regina was amazing twice today. We truly appreciate your time and your dedication to be here. So thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who stuck out the weird times with us today. We appreciate you. And this, again, it's not the end. We have a movie viewing tonight. We have our Island Grad this weekend. Please come support those events. Again, it's really important to show up, to give space to celebrate the accomplishments of our students, especially right now. We have not had an in-person graduation for a couple years, so we want to celebrate and honor them. I think that's all I have. Again, I just want to say thank you. I'm going to hang out on Zoom for a little bit if anyone wants to hang out. But we appreciate you. We appreciate your time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.